An argument I've heard a lot of people make when it comes to movies in the past 5 to 10 years is that Hollywood has gone woke and that this has ruined movies. And usually these people point to the many examples of movies having stories which are heavily influenced by what is now known as woke ideology. And according to the right wing and many film critics, Hollywood is attempting to push this woke ideology through movies. Examples of this ideology include race swapping of white characters or other forms of forced racial diversity, adding transgender or other non-binary characters to the cast, changing characters' sexuality from straight to homosexual, including more radical forms of feminism which is more in line with recent, more explicit man-hating forms of feminism, excessive use of girl bosses, and emasculating well-established male characters. Criticisms of this new woke Hollywood are accompanied by a form of nostalgia for what they see as a time before Hollywood went woke, which, according to them, was when movies were actually good and, as they see it, devoid of propaganda. But what we're going to discuss is whether this view is actually correct. Is being woke and pushing woke agendas in movies a recent trend that didn't exist before 10 years ago? Is woke Hollywood a strictly recent phenomenon? What I'm going to show in this video is that in reality, subversive propaganda was always a part of Hollywood from the very beginning, and there was never a time when Hollywood was not woke. And the reason we think that Hollywood was not woke up until a few years ago is because Hollywood's propaganda was so effective in brainwashing our minds and shaping our worldview that we simply did not see it. We just saw the world Hollywood presented as normal, and not because it was devoid of propaganda, but rather it was us who had become numb to it. So let's go back to the early days of Hollywood's history, back in the interwar period during the 1920s. A modern viewer, even a so-called modern right-wing viewer, would look at the Hollywood of those days and see it to be devoid of things like transgenderism, homosexuality, radical feminism, and think to himself, wow, Hollywood must have been so based and trad back then. But the truth is that in the Hollywood of the 20s, we see some extreme examples of nudity and sexuality being presented to society. A society that only 10 years prior considered women showing their ankles to be scandalous. Now a lot of you viewers might scoff at these so-called old-timey restrictions. And again, the reason is that most of our standards and worldviews have been shaped by Hollywood, with or without us knowing. But modesty was the norm of all civilizations all around the world up until that point. And suddenly you have Hollywood showing nudity. But Hollywood's subversion did not end at the content of the movies, but also in how movies themselves were presented. Up until that time, cinemas were not allowed to open on Sundays, because Sundays were seen as a day dedicated to God. But Wilhelm Fuchs, the founder and namesake of the Fox Media Company, did not like America's religious traditions getting in the way of his profits. So he lobbied the government to lift this ban. And by doing this, he took Sundays from being the domain of God to being just another day dedicated to earthly entertainment. But Hollywood's actions did not go without backlash, because people saw the Hollywood of that era as so subversive that a literal social movement began to fight against it, called the Legion of Decency. During the 30s, the Legion of Decency held protests, boycotts, and even picketing in order to force Hollywood to stop trying to spread degeneracy. This led to the implementation of the Hays Code, which became Hollywood's self-regulation code, and would disallow sexual, degenerate, and violent imagery in films. But that was not the end of Hollywood's attempts at subversion, as even after the implementation of the Hays Code, Hollywood films kept trying to get as close to the red lines as they could, and even cross them once in a while. This effort escalated after World War II, when even themes such as adultery, sex, and even blasphemy started to appear more and more in films. One example is the screening of an Italian film called The Miracle, which very explicitly ridiculed the story of nativity. At first, the film was banned in New York City, but Hollywood took their case to the Supreme Court and won the right to distribute a clearly anti-Christian film. Around the same time, many Hollywood films started to outright glorify adultery, with the 1960 Oscar for Best Picture being given to one such film. And this was during a time when adultery was still considered a crime. By the 60s, Hollywood started to go for nudity again. In 1963, for the first time since the Hays Code, a film was released which contained not only nude imagery, but also the theme of swinging. But the killing blow came next year, with the film The Pawnbroker, which effectively killed the Hays Code. From that moment onwards, The floodgates of Hollywood were opened, and movie after movie would be produced, breaking every stigma imaginable. Just to give an example of how degenerate Hollywood would become, the 1970 Oscar for Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay would be given to an X-rated movie about a male prostitute. From that moment onwards, the subversive nature of Hollywood would only become worse. In 1975, The Stepford Wives would release, a film that portrayed being a housewife as nothing but dreadful slavery. A film that would become so influential that the term Stepford wife would enter the common vernacular as a slur against happy suburban housewives. In 1982, Disney's Tron would become the first children's movie to feature a non-married cohabiting couple. In 1989, The Simpsons first appeared on TV screens. Created by Epstein client Matt Groening, it would go on to deconstruct traditional values, religion, and the role of fathers in the minds of millions of viewers. A further attack on fatherhood came in 1992, when the popular TV show Murphy Brown broke the stigma of women intentionally having a child without a father, and it became such a huge issue that even the vice president condemned the episode. The list of Hollywood's efforts at subverting traditional culture could go on, and this was just a small sample of how Hollywood has always tried to propagandize its audiences. So know that Hollywood has always been a force for subversion and ideological manipulation, and that its wokeness is nothing new. We are simply experiencing the latest round of its subversion. Leave a comment and let us know what you think. Share this video if you liked it, and thank you all for watching. Goodbye.